I'll just review it. I'm not going to go through this. There was a Rabbi Rav Papa said that if the tenant farmer is failing to produce any crops, and there's a difference of opinion whether you have to go for 2 seasons, 3 seasons, Rav Papa says you have to continue planting well into February. If you remember, he uses the stars as when there's certain constellations in the sky. So luckily we have Steins also tell us that means the end of February. I wouldn't have known myself, but so it's interesting. It's interesting that you would have to keep planting until February, because most of us don't think of the end of February as being planting season. So then it goes into this discussion about what are the seasons, and how do you divide up the seasons, the planting seasons, and in general the harvest and weather patterns, things like that. So they actually use a verse from the Torah, and they come up with 6 seasons. I'm not going to go through all that. We did that last time. And then the thing is that even under the most liberal interpretation of the seasons, planting season ends in Cheshvan, which is November, maybe mid-November, something like that too. So the discussion ends up being a challenge to Rav Papa. It's Rav Papa that says you have to keep planting till February. And the rabbis come back and say, then the Torah gives us the seasons. There's no planting season in February. So what are you talking about? And there's an obvious answer in 189, the top of the page. Lo kasha. So lo kasha means it's not a difficulty, but we resolve the difficulty. Had de kablabin mani micharpe. So one is about when you finish in the winter. Chorif is winter. It's still the Hebrew word for winter. But winter for the Talmud doesn't mean winter for us. Certainly doesn't mean winter if you grew up in a cold weather climate. Winter for the Talmud meant October, November, really late fall. And where it really wasn't very cold, but you would continue to plant. I remember a time, that's also very different in California, and I understand that too. And I grew up in Cleveland where winter was winter and it was freezing. And I remember, there's a break in the academic calendar in Israel around the time of the holidays. Holidays go on for like a month. So the break is mid-September to mid-October, something like that. And generally October 1st is sort of the end of the summer. And they generally don't use the term fall, stav. They generally don't use the word fall. Like California, it's sort of basically 2 seasons, summer and winter. But it's still quite warm, just like here. It's quite warm in October. So, you're traveling through the country because it's a break. I was traveling through the country. I was a student. And, you'd go to national parks. And sometimes the national parks are closed because they're only open in the summer. So, you go to the gate and they say it's closed because it's the winter. And, in the meantime, I'm wearing shorts and say... Yeah, and they say it's winter. We can't, we're closed. It's winter. So that winter is what they mean there. Winter is sort of the end of the summer harvest. It's called winter, and so they're saying that's what our rabbis were referring to. Ha de kabla b'nei ba'afle, and afle is the late winter, what we would call the late winter, or February, beginning of March, and Rav Papa. And there are crops. So they're sophisticated farmers, and we're not. But there are actually crops that you would plant in February. Like Tu B'Shvat, we talk about things starting to bud, but there's actually things that you would plant, and they even gives us some, like barley and pulse. We've had pulse before, some kind of grain that you feed animals. Barley we're familiar with. Those are plants that those are crops that you actually plant in February. So that resolves that contradiction. Any questions? Okay. All right, now we're changing the subject back to the original Mishnah, which was months ago. See if anybody remembers. This is Rabbi Yehuda Omer. So we have an opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, and I mentioned this last week, but I'll just review it quickly. When you lease a field, there are 2 methods of payments that the Mishnah talks about. One is a percentage of the crops, and one is a flat rate, cash. Okay? And Rabbi Yehuda says, Im kabla b'mene b'ma'ot. Rabbi Yehuda says, if the agreement is to pay in cash, a flat fixed amount, in that case, you are not allowed to deduct from the rent, even if there's a natural disaster. So that was the whole discussion of the Mishnah. If there's a natural disaster and you're paying a percentage, you actually can deduct in your rent what you're paying to the landowner because of the natural disaster. Rabbi Yehuda says if it's a flat rate cash, under no circumstances are you allowed to ever deduct. You have to pay the rent. Okay, that's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Now we have a case. Hahu Gavra. There was a person. De kabel are. He leased a piece of land. Lemizare behu tume. Aguda de nahar malka sacha. Okay, so he leased a field. He was growing garlic. Tume, which in modern Hebrew is shum. Shum, right? But in Aramaic, the taf and the shin are interchangeable. It's one of these tricks about figuring out, Hebrew from Aramaic. So tum in Aramaic is shum in Hebrew. So he's planting garlic, and it's along the river Malka Sava. Okay, so it was a river in Babylonia, I believe. Yes, in Babylonia, and he leased it with zuzim, like bitre zuze, with cash. So it was cash. It wasn't you didn't get a percentage of garlic from the landowner. The landowner got cash. Okay. All right. So we know what Rabbi Yehuda would say. If there's a natural disaster, he would say, you got to pay your rent. Okay. Here's what happened. Istakar Nahar Malka Sava. The river, and he relies on the river for irrigation. The river got jammed up. Okay. Which doesn't happen frequently and also affects all the fields around it. So in other words, it's not the fault of the farmer. It's not that he was a poor farmer. It's that something crazy happened. The whole river got dammed up, okay? Which, in our definition, would probably be a makat medina, a regional disaster, because it affects all the other fields, doesn't only affect his field. It was something out of his control. Ata lakameda rava. So, obviously, he wants to deduct from his rent. The landowner doesn't want him to deduct from his rent. They can't come to an agreement, so they go to Rava, a very well-known rabbi in Babylonia, okay? Amarle, he says to them, actually, this is now the farmer says, the sharecropper. Nehar malka sava lo avida mistakar. So this doesn't happen. This river doesn't, in general, become clogged up. Right. So it's makat medinahi. So it's a regional disaster. So I shouldn't have to pay. Now, what's the problem with that argument? Rav Yehuda makes the ruling that if the arrangement was cash, you always have to pay, no matter what. It's one of these things that we like because it's very simple. There are no exceptions to it. You have to pay. Okay. But Rava says, Zil nakele. Rava confuses things and says, you can deduct it from your rent. Okay, that's odd. Amru le Rabbanan the Rava. The sages write a letter to Rava, or they protest Rava. Ha anantan, but they said we have a Mishnah, and the Mishnah comes before Rava. And Rava is supposed to rely on the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda mer ikna blahi menamamot ben kach uven kach eino menakelo min chachuro. So now they quote to him the Mishnah, where Rabbi Yehuda says, no matter what happens, ben kach doesn't matter. The climate, nothing matters. Doesn't matter regional disaster. If the arrangement is a flat rate in cash, you never deduct. What's going on, Rava? Rava answers, Amar lahu leit dechash le Rabbi Yehuda. So the response is something every rabbi at some point hears. No one pays attention to Rabbi Yehuda. That's what Rava says. We don't pay attention to Rabbi Yehuda. I know what Rabbi Yehuda said. I'm familiar with the Mishnah. We don't listen to Rabbi Yehuda. What does he know? He doesn't know anything. An old custom of dismissing.
Yehuda was in Palestine, right?
Well, Yehuda was in Palestine, yes, in Israel, and because all the writers of the Mishnah was written in the land of Israel. And Rava's in Babylonia. Now, Rabbi Yehuda was a minority opinion in the Mishnah anyway, so it's not as outrageous as it sounds. It was a single opinion, and you're allowed to disagree with a single opinion. It's just the way that Rava puts it, which is interesting. Nobody follows Rava, because there are times where in a minority opinion where there are communities that follow the minority opinion. That's not unusual. Once the opinion appears in the Talmud, it's a legitimate opinion, and you can choose to follow that. So Rava says, late, nobody follows Rabbi Yehuda. So of course, because we have that in the Talmud, that becomes the halacha. So the halacha is actually you can deduct from your rent for makat medina. Then all we have to do is define what makat medina means, all the other stuff. But if there's a regional disaster, whether you've contracted to pay a percentage or a flat rate in cash, you are allowed to deduct it. And we learned that from Rava ultimately, because from Rava we learned nobody follows Rabbi Yehuda. Okay? We'll go on. Okay, another Mishnah. So you can tell we're actually getting to the end of the chapter because the Mishnahs are coming one after another. They usually don't come up this closely, but okay. Hamekabel sadeh mechaveiro. So you lease a leasing arrangement again, where you lease a field from a landowner, page 190. So I think it's the last page, right? The last page of your, yeah. Be'asara kor chitim l'shana. And it is a flat rate, except you're paying in produce. And the flat rate is 10 cores. A core is a rate of measure. So it's a certain amount of wheat l'shana. Okay? So I'm going to use your field, and in payment for the field, I'm going to give you 10 cores of wheat. Okay? So the 10 cores of wheat is as an example. I'm giving you a flat rate, but I'm going to pay you in produce. I'm not going to pay you in cash. Okay? Now, vilakta. Okay, so the field itself was struck. So you didn't get a good crop. It wasn't a total disaster. There was still a crop, but it wasn't a good crop. The word lakta can mean all sorts of disasters that came to the field. Bad weather, a storm, insects, something like that. But the field. So now, the issue you'd want to ask is in a case like this. So I'm agreeing to pay you 10 cores of wheat. Do we assume that the guy's growing wheat?
Yes.
Yeah, probably. Because where's he going to get it? I mean, it's not like people had money in the bank or they had wheat in the bank, or so. Yes, you assume. So your assumption, of course, is that he's going to give you that amount of wheat from his own crop. Okay. So, but not necessarily, right? I mean, it depends on the contract. Maybe he goes to the store with his money and he buys wheat. Maybe the guy he's selling to actually is a wheat farmer and wants the wheat. So although you might assume that he's going to pay from his produce himself, that's going to be the issue here. It's not 100% certain from the Mishnah itself that he's going to pay him that wheat from his own crop. Okay, and because you at least theoretically have the possibility that he's going to go to the store and buy wheat. Okay, and just to confuse things a bit, what kind of wheat is he going to give him? And but what's the quality of the wheat is he going to give him?
It's from the field. It may not be as good.
Especially if it was something bad happened. So if there were insects, and now it could be the insects don't destroy the crop entirely, but make it a less than desirable crop. So if there's that kind of disaster in the field, can you give your landlord then, here's your wheat? And the guy looks, this is wormy wheat or whatever it is. Well, that's what I got. It's your field. That's the question. No ten lo mitocha. So the Mishnah says you give him the bad wheat. From the bad wheat, you give him, even absent anything to the contrary in the contract itself. If it just says I'm giving you 10 cores of wheat, you give him the wheat from your field, even if it's not good wheat. Okay? Is that clear? That's the Mishnah. We'll analyze that in a second, but that's the Mishnah. Now, Hayu chita yafot. Now let's say it was a great year, and he got incredible wheat, really valuable wheat. Lo yomer lo harene lokech min hashuk. You can't then go and buy mediocre wheat from the market and then here's your 10 core of wheat. No, I want my wheat that you grew because that's a particularly good field. So no matter what happens, that's what the Mishnah is saying. It's a bad crop, the owner gets the bad crop. It's a good crop, the owner gets the good crop. So what do we see happen here is that it's a partnership. So, and that seems to be what the Mishnah is encouraging, is that they are both taking risks, both the landowner. So this is my field, and we're in it together. And they're both therefore hoping for a good crop. And the landowner's hoping for a good crop because then he gets the good wheat. And of course the sharecropper's hoping for a good crop because he gets the money anyway. But neither of them can get away from that particular partnership. The payment comes from the field itself. Okay, got it? Ella noten lo mitocha. He gives him from the field itself. Okay, any questions? All right, we'll keep going and we'll see if we're going to switch packets. I think we might. All right, now we have a case. Ahu gavra de kabel ara la'afsita bechore deshare. Okay, so of course they're always screwing things up, right? It seems like it's simple enough. I'm leasing wheat and I'm going to give you wheat. Okay, but it doesn't happen that way. Okay, he leased the field for fodder. So fodder, that's not in a crop actually, right? Fodder is something that it's
something the cattle eat.
It's something the cattle eat, right? So it could be anything. Yeah. Obviously, it's a cheaper crop because it's not something humans eat. But you're in business. This is I'm leasing your field so I can grow fodder. Okay, that's it. Okay, but I'm going to pay you in barley. Bekore de share. Okay, share. Sare, that's barley. Okay, so it's an unusual arrangement. Okay, he's going to grow fodder, but he's going to pay the landlord in barley. Okay, and that's apparently the contract. Okay, so avda asastata. Okay, so he grows fodder. V'charasha uzara. I'm sorry, 1 second. I think I got it a little bit right now. So produce the fodder. Okay. Okay. So then you take some of your own field. So he's growing fodder, right. But in order to pay off the landlord, he's also got to grow some barley. Because that's what he paid for. Right. So it's unusual. So the land, either they worked it out, the guy says, I'll take a corner of the field and I'll grow barley, but my main crop here is fodder. Okay. So he had a good year for the fodder. But he goes charashah sare. He goes and he grows barley. What happens? Ulaku hani sare. So and just the barley got messed up, right? That doesn't say what, but some kind of disaster. It doesn't strike the whole field. It just strikes the barley. The fodder is fine. Okay. All right. So they don't know what to do.
It may have been sequential. It could be.
Yeah, I think it is sequential. Yeah.
The fodder grows fast.
Right.
So you harvest it and then you plow it.
Right, exactly. So and he's only growing the barley because he's got to pay his landlord. Okay. So they don't know what to do. So should I pay him now in fodder because I've got good fodder to fodder, but the contract is that barley, and the owner's expecting barley. Maybe the owner's a barley salesman and expects barley for his own. So anyway, Shalcha Rav Chaviva Misura Deprat Dekame Ravina. Rav Chaviva, who comes from Sura, which is on the river Euphrates, in case you didn't know where it is, writes to Ravina, who is an authority in Babylonia. They're both in Babylonia. Ki hai gavna mai. What do I do? What do I do in this particular case? And now they have to analyze the case. Okay. Kidlakta notain lo mitocha. All right, and he says he's quoting the Mishnah. Is this the rule I should follow? The rule is that if the crop was struck, you still pay him from that crop, dame or lo. Is it like that or not? In which case, I give him inferior barley because that's what is it? So it could mean one of two things, right? Even that's complicated because let's say the simplest explanation would be the barley that I grew specifically for him was an inferior crop of barley, but I pay for him anyway from that crop because that's what the Mishnah says. Or it could be that since the fodder was an outstanding crop, I give him from the fodder, and then he sells the fodder and buys barley with it. Or so what do you do? Okay, we'll take a break as I'm gonna pass around some. It's not a
magic trick.
Yeah. Let's see. It's not a huge packet since we're going to stop this pretty soon. But we'll get through the end of this. There's 191 on the top. It should say 191.
What is this?
It has a 106B on the right-hand corner, and it's 191 at the bottom. Oh, that's just empty. So, all right. What's interesting is the writing letters back and forth. I mean, it wasn't like he could email him or text him. So there had to be actual letters that would go back and forth where they would make these rulings. So, Amarle midame. So Ravina answers and says, so is midame is a challenge, that it's not like the Mishnah at all. So don't think it's like the Mishnah. So don't follow the Mishnah. So and meaning that you would give him this inferior barley, and because it goes like this, hatam. So in the case of the Mishnah, lo avda ara shlichuta damara. In the Mishnah itself, the land didn't follow the wishes of the farmer. The farmer said, I want good wheat, and the land didn't cooperate. The land gave him inferior wheat, so what are you going to do? The farmer tried all he could. I mean, but it was really the land. In other words, so in the Mishnah, it's the land's fault. The land didn't give him the crop that he wanted, so you can't blame the farmer. You can't blame the farmer for that, okay? Hacha avda ara shlichuta damara. But in this case, the land actually did follow the instructions of the farmer, because the farmer wanted fodder. That's his main crop. All right, so that seems that seems to mean that you actually have to pay him either a good amount of barley, or you pay him an equivalent amount in the fodder, which is a good amount of fodder. And but you don't give him the inferior barley, because the barley there is an afterthought. You only grew the barley to pay off your landlord. It wasn't really your main idea from the land. So I'm not suggesting this is the case, but they're saying as if the land actually has some kind of will, sense of, well, you asked me for barley. I mean, you asked me for fodder. I grew fodder. So, but it also could be, you're setting up the land for a particular crop. So don't expect the land then suddenly as an afterthought so you didn't prepare the land for barley. You prepared the land for fodder. So, yeah.
I assume he said, I will pay you 10 bushels of barley for
the land.
The use of the land.
Use of the land, right, yeah.
Well, if it's a good crop of barley, he gets 12 bushels, and he can sell the other two.
Why does he get 12? Why do you say that?
If it's a good crop,
I say it's a good crop. Yeah,
he gets 12.
Yeah.
He can keep two.
Yeah. Well, the problem was it was a bad crop. That's why there was a lawsuit. Yeah. If there had been a good crop, there wouldn't have been a lawsuit anyway.
It's a bad crop. He only got 4 things of barley. He still has to go out and find 6 more.
Yeah. So the thing is that probably the farmer said, I'm going to plant barley. And and the landowner assumed, or the farmer said something like, I'll lease your land, and in return for the land, I'll give you barley. And so the farmer the landowner now is assuming, okay, he's going to plant barley. The landowner finds out you didn't plant barley at all. The only reason you planted barley was to pay me. Instead, you switched everything, and now and you planted fodder, and you left a little corner of the field for barley. And so then they go to the rabbi, and the rabbi says, you intended that land for fodder and for barley, so the landowner has the right to expect a good crop of barley because he thought that was going to be your main crop.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the reason for the ruling. So you planted one thing as your main crop, and you only as an afterthought decided to plant something to pay your rent.
Yeah, even if it was a good crop of barley, you said 10%.
Right, even if it was but if it was a good crop, then it wouldn't have come to court.
Been an issue.
Right, he may not even have known. Right, yeah, right.
He'll have to buy it because he doesn't have it, so he has to get it somewhere.
Yes, that's what he's going to have to do. He's going to have to get it somehow. He's going to have to buy it or give him the cash equivalent.
Because the price of barley goes up and down.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so does fodder. Yeah, remember he had a good year for fodder, so he can take. He's not in that bad of trouble. So
I read it a little differently. I thought the deal was you'll give me the land so I can grow fodder,
right?
And I'll pay you in barley,
right? Yeah.
And that meant that the assumption is that the barley has to be of good quality,
right,
not dependent on the weather and the
right. Especially if you had a good crop for barley. For fodder. Yeah. So now the next case clarifies things a little bit more too, because now it's a little bit more specific. Hahu Graubart de kabel pardes mechavre ba'asar dane chamra. Okay. So this is interesting. So you a guy leases a field. What's interesting is in Steinsaltz, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but Steinsaltz actually has a different translation depending on literal translation and commentary. And we really only can tell from the context. So pardes, the Hebrew word pardes, what does that mean?
It's a holy field.
Yeah, or an orchard. Orchard is modern Hebrew. In the Talmud, it's an orchard.
That's where the 4 rabbis went to go.
Exactly. So the thing is that what comes out of this pardes is wine. So it must not mean orchard. It must mean vineyard. Okay. And then later, what's interesting is that Steinsaltz translates as vineyard. So we're going to assume from context that they use the word pardes to mean vineyard and not just for orchard. So anyway, so you lease a vineyard, and you're going to pay the landlord in the finished product of wine, because you could pay him in grapes. That's like paying him in barley. But you pay him in wine. So it's not only that you grow grapes. You're also, like many vintners around, you actually make the wine there in the fields. So the same person and that was totally common in those days. You actually did the production of the wine, okay? And I will pay you I'll give you 10 barrels of wine. Okay, so it's 10 barrels of wine in payment, okay? Now what happens is takif hahu chamra, the wine went bad. Okay, so the wine going bad may or may not be the fault of the crop. the implication here is it's not the fault of the crop. Maybe you're a good farmer, but you're a poor winemaker. There's something in the okay. So the guy, gets his wine and tastes it. He gets it as a taster. This isn't good wine. Yeah. Now at the same time, that's what he contracted for. So now Savar Rav Kahana Lemeimar. So the case comes for Rav Kahana. Remember, these cases only come to rabbis if something went wrong. So that's what went wrong. The wine wasn't good. And Rav Kahana now is wondering. We actually hear him wondering out loud. So do we follow the Mishnah? Because the Mishnah says that if something goes wrong with the crop, you still pay the guy from the crop. Okay? So on the one hand, it does follow that case because this crop produced the bad wine. On the other hand, it's not quite that because in the production of the wine, something might have gone wrong. Okay? Is that clear?
Yep.
So that's what he's got to figure out. Okay? Amar le Rav Ashi. So Rav Ashi then responds to him. Oh, actually, I think Kahana rules that way. Kahana says, no, it counts because you pay him from your crop. Your crop made that wine, and it's too bad it was bad wine, but it's from the crop. It's Rav Ashi that objects to that ruling. Okay, so Rav Ashi says, midame. He says they are not the same. These cases are not the case. And now he's going to have a similar rationale as we had above. Hatam lo avda arash lichuta. So in the case of our Mishnah, again, the land didn't do what it was supposed to do. Right? The land was supposed to come up with wheat, and it didn't happen because of whatever, weather or insects, whatever. Hacha avda arash lichuta. Here, the assumption is the land did its job. The grapes were fine. Can't blame the land. Okay? Umode Rav Ashi beinchem dechadum. And Rav Ashi says, however, if it's so stop for a second. Sorry. So in the case, he's saying that the land did its job, and if it was in the production of the wine that was the fault, then the renter, right, the farmer, the winemaker, has to find a way to make it up to the landowner and give him good wine, because if it was his fault and the land did its job, and the landowner is responsible for the land. Umode Rav Ashi, but Rav Ashi says, Be'invei dechadum. If you had wormy grapes is actually the fault of the land. Okay, so the landowner then has to take some responsibility. Uvisadeh shilakta ba'omareha. Or if there was some problem in the sheaves, which are part of the crop of the grape. So if there was a problem in the produce itself, in the field itself, then the landowner has to accept inferior wine. But if the land did its job and made good grapes, and it was in the production of the wine that was the problem, then the landowner can demand better payment. Okay. Any questions?
No,
We'll stop there.
From